How are you feeling tonight? I hope your body is relaxed and your mind is calm. If sleep feels far away, this story might help you drift gently into rest. Tonight we're traveling back to the candlelit kitchens and smoky hearths of the Middle Ages. A time when food was more than survival. It was faith, ritual, and mystery. What did they eat before midnight? Why did nobles dine on gold-dusted pies while peasants shared a single bowl of stew? How did fasting, prayer, and hunger shape their nights? And what secret recipes have been lost to time? Stay with me, dear listener, as we uncover the forgotten foods of the medieval world, where every loaf of bread told a story and every meal carried a prayer. You won. To want to miss a moment of this quiet journey through history's hidden table. Before we begin, take a deep breath, settle into your pillow, and if you enjoy stories that bring the past to life, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments, where in the world are you listening from tonight? Have you ever wondered what medieval people ate before midnight? When the flicker of tallow candles danced on rough wooden walls and the air smelled of hearth smoke and bread cooling on the stone shelf. Hunger in the Middle Ages was not a choice. It was a rhythm of life. The sun dictated when mouths opened and when they must stay closed. For when darkness fell, the rules of fasting and faith crept in like a silent priest, whispering through the corridors of time. People ate not because they desired, but because they were allowed to. And when the bells of the monastery tower tolled the last prayer before night, the village hearth grew quiet. No clinking of bowls, no laughter of children, only the soft sound of spoons being rinsed and the fire sighing low as it sank into embers. In those days, food was more than sustenance. It was sacred timing. Each bite carried moral weight, for to eat beyond the hour, decreed by the church, was to flirt with sin. So before midnight, before the world sank into silence, they gathered around coarse wooden tables, their hands rough with work, their hearts both humble and hungry. A pot of pottage simmered, thick with barley, onions, and whatever root had survived the season. Perhaps a sliver of salted pork saved for feast days. Perhaps a shred of yesterday's bread softened again in the broth. The taste was earthy, humble, honest. In the flicker of the fire, one might see the glisten of grease on the rim of a clay bowl, and the steam rising like prayer incense to the dark rafters above. Those who lived in monasteries kept stricter time than the peasants beyond the walls, for monks rose and slept by the call of the bell. Their meals were measured by divine schedule, one before midday, another before sunset, and after that, none at all. Yet the body does not always yield to devotion. The stomach growled and twisted through the long, cold hours until dawn. So sometimes a quiet compromise was made. A sip of ale to soothe the ache. A crust of bread blessed and called a mercy. No sin in that, perhaps, just a human truth. Still, outside the abbey gates, villagers followed the seasons rather than scripture, though even they knew that to eat after compline was frowned upon by God and gossip alike. But temptation had a way of creeping in, like smoke under the door. Picture this: the moon high over a thatched roof, the sound of crickets, the low breath of the ox in its stall. Inside the cottage, a woman leans near the dying fire. She reaches for a small pot hidden under a cloth. Inside, a handful of peas, cooked soft and sweet from supper, untouched. She hesitates, listening for footsteps. The cottage around her hums with sleep, the child's soft breathing, her husband's steady snore. And still, she takes a single spoonful, tasting the comfort of warmth before the fast returns. Such moments were private, small acts of rebellion against the long hunger of night. For most villagers, supper was their final meal, and it came early, long before the stars sharpened in the sky. They called it soper, the root of our modern word supper, and it might be served before the 8th bell around sunset. Its contents depended on the class of the eater. The noble might dine on roasted fowl, seasoned with herbs, honey, and wine, while the peasant filled his belly with cabbage and coarse rye bread. Yet hunger was an equalizer. Noble or not, The hours before midnight were slow ones. The stomach began to remember what it missed. The tongue longed for flavor and warmth. Some would drink weak ale. Others chewed herbs to trick the belly into calm. But there were always stories told to distract the mind. Grandmothers spinning yarns about saints who could live on air, or sinners punished for stealing meat on fasting days. Each tale a soft lesson wrapped in superstition, for even stories could feed the soul. As night deepened, the village quieted. Even the dogs slept, the air outside thick with mist and moonlight. In manor kitchens, the servants cleaned away the bones, the grease, the crumbs, for tomorrow's bread had to be mixed before dawn. And in monasteries, monks filed into cold stone dormitories, their breath white in the chill, whispering psalms as their stomachs whispered their own. The silence was holy and heavy, but behind it lived the memory of taste. Roasted leeks, salted fish, lentil stew. The smell lingered like a ghost. Food was never far from thought because it meant survival, and survival was a form of faith in itself. In winter months, when daylight shrank and hunger stretched long before the next harvest, many went to bed early, not from weariness, but to escape the gnawing ache of emptiness. Sleeping through hunger was a mercy, the body's quiet rebellion against want. Yet for some, the night before midnight was not still. The baker worked by lamplight, kneading dough with numb hands, preparing loaves that would rise before the first mass. The smell of yeast and ash drifted through the lanes, faint and teasing, perhaps enough to wake a child or a stray dog. It was the scent of hope, disguised as hunger. In castles, the kitchens glowed longer, the hearths fed by oak logs. Nobles entertained guests with late feasts, though even they observed fasts when commanded by the church. But loopholes were everywhere. If meat was forbidden, fish was allowed. If milk was barred, almond milk could take its place. Cooks became cunning, turning piety into art. The line between sin and supper was thin and often blurred under candlelight. Before midnight, the medieval world was not asleep. It was merely quiet, wrapped in ritual and restraint. The monks counted prayers, the peasants counted hours, the bakers counted loaves. Yet all of them shared the same soft ache in the belly, the same patient wait for dawn, when the bell would ring, the first note of forgiveness, and another day of eating could begin. Hunger had rhythm then. It moved with the world itself, steady, ancient, unyielding. Before midnight, every bite was a promise, a hope, a quiet rebellion against the rules of time and faith. And that simple act of eating when one should not eat held the heartbeat of humanity itself. For what is a meal if not a small defiance of the dark? What is hunger if not the soul's reminder that we are still alive, still waiting, still dreaming beneath the moon's pale eye? After the last bell had faded into the cold night air, the world seemed to hold its breath. Beyond the monastery walls, beyond the fields slick with dew, a faint glow still flickered from the manor kitchens. Even when the village slept, the kitchens did not sleep. For the fire, once kindled, was sacred. It could not be allowed to die out, not even for an hour. So someone always stayed behind, a scullery maid, a cook's boy, or sometimes an old woman whose eyes had long grown dim, but whose hands still remembered the rhythm of stirring and tasting. They worked in near silence, the scrape of a ladle, the slow hiss of fat-meeting flame. Every sound felt louder in the night, yet strangely comforting, like a heartbeat echoing through stone and wood and smoke. This was the hour of secret meals and forbidden thoughts, when the scent of roasted meat or warm bread floated like memory through the corridors above, where nobles dreamed of feasts and peasants dreamed of crumbs. It is easy to imagine that medieval nights were still and empty, but listen closely, and you might hear the whispers of hunger moving like wind under doors. Not every stomach bowed to church bells. Some men returned late from the fields, too tired to care for rules. They would slice bread from the loaf, dip it into leftover stew, and eat by firelight, heads low as if hiding from God. But it was not sin, it was survival. The monks might fast for devotion, the peasants for necessity. Both learned patience, but patience cannot fill a hollow stomach. In the quiet kitchens, a pot might be left on the embers overnight, thickening by the hour, its surface darkening with flavor. Barley oats, onions, a few beans, if luck allowed. Sometimes even bones boiled until the marrow melted into the broth. This slow simmering became the night's companion, its bubbling soft and steady like the murmur of prayer. Outside, the abbey fields lay hushed, the sheep still, the crows asleep. But from the baker's hut came the faint rhythm of kneading, palms pressing dough like breathing in and out, the flour dust rising in the dim glow of a single candle. Dawn's loaves had to be ready before the bell called the first prayer. In those hours before midnight, when hunger whispered and the world held to silence, people found comfort in motion, in stirring, in shaping, in tasting. They believed that keeping hands busy kept the mind from temptation. Yet even the most faithful cook might taste the stew once, twice, more than needed. For tasting was not feasting, it was duty, wasn't it? The line between duty and desire blurred easily under the cover of darkness. In the noble kitchens, luxury never truly slept. A servant might roast spiced pears in honey, or test a sauce made from almond milk and ginger, even though supper had ended long ago. These were tasks for the morrow. But why wait? Curiosity and hunger often walked hand in hand. So perhaps one spoonful slipped past the lips, one sweet mouthful that no lord would ever know about. Sin? Maybe. But small sins are sweeter when shared with no one. The servants whispered stories as they worked, ghost tales of cooks punished for stealing pies, of spirits who guarded the pantry and rattled pots to warn the greedy. They said that if one stole bread after midnight, it would turn to ashes on the tongue. But still, now and then, a crumb went missing, a secret shared between hunger and hope. Even the monasteries were not immune. Though the rules were carved in stone, though fasting was sacred and gluttony. One of the 7 deadly sins, temptation, drifted in like incense. The youngest novices, tasked to watch the kitchen at night, sometimes broke their vows. A bite of cheese here, a sip of broth there, small comforts stolen from the edge of holiness. And though they knelt long in confession, the next night, hunger came again. Hunger always came. In those cold hours before dawn, the kitchens seemed alive in their stillness. The coals glowed like watchful eyes. The air was thick with the scent of herbs, thyme, rosemary, parsley, their perfume masking the sharper smell of smoke and sweat. And somewhere, behind the closed door of the pantry, hung meat salted and safe against decay, rows of hams, fish laid in barrels of brine, and herbs strung to dry, each one a promise of tomorrow's meal. But tonight, they were silent witnesses to longing. What would it have been like to walk through those kitchens at midnight, barefoot across the rushes to feel the heat of the hearth on one cheek and the chill of the stone floor on the other, to breathe in the mingled scent of bread and smoke and ash, to hear the quiet hum of something alive yet unseen? There was beauty in it too, a kind of peace, the peace of knowing that even in hunger, the world still worked, the fire still burned, the dough still rose, the monks still prayed, the stars still turned. Everything moved together in slow, patient rhythm. There was no hurry, no light, but plenty of life. Even in darkness, the people of the Middle Ages understood something we have mostly forgotten, that the act of preparing food, even in silence, even without tasting, it was a form of faith, a conversation between hand and heart, between body and time. They cooked not just for need, but for meaning, for order, in a world that often felt uncertain and cruel. And so the quiet kitchens of night became sanctuaries, not of wealth, but of warmth. Here, secrets simmered as slowly as stew. Here, hunger softened into patience, and patience into peace. Outside, a dog barked once. Then nothing but the rustle of straw in the stables, the faint creak of a shutter, the sigh of wind against thatch. Inside, the fire crackled once, then stilled. The night was long, but gentle. In the small hours before dawn, when the scent of bread began to rise again through the village lanes, People stirred in their sleep. The hunger eased. The first birds began to sing. And somewhere, a monk reached for his bell, to wake the world, to call it to prayer, to break the silence of fasting. The kitchens of night had done their duty. They had carried the living through the hardest hours and left behind only the promise of morning warmth. The bell rang once, and then again, its tone soft at first, then steady, echoing through stone and field, through cold air still heavy with mist. It was the call to prayer, but also the call to hunger. For after a long night of silence, after hours of fasting, the sound meant more than devotion. It meant the return of warmth, the return of food. Across the village, small fires were rekindled. Smoke rose, thin and blue, curling into the pale light. The day began not with words, but with scent. Bread baking over fresh flame, milk warming in clay pots, the faint crack of crust meeting heat. Bread, the oldest comfort, the simplest prayer of the medieval table. And yet, even here, questions lingered. What did it mean to eat after a night of restraint? Was it only hunger, or was it something sacred? The monks believed it was both. To break the fast was to honor balance, to remind the body that suffering was not eternal, that patience had purpose. Within monastery walls, the brothers moved like shadows, each step measured, each breath quiet. The refectory lay cold, stone tables bare save for the small wooden bowls lined in rows. The air carried a hint of barley and herbs, the morning pottage thick and plain, meant to fill, but not delight. A bell sounded again. The brothers took their seats, heads bowed, hands folded. No speech was allowed during the meal. Only the sound of spoons, the soft rhythm of shared silence. Somewhere near the door, one monk read aloud from the scriptures, his voice low and unbroken, each word floating above the clatter like smoke, a reminder that nourishment of the soul must match nourishment of the flesh. When the meal ended, they rose in unison, each bowl rinsed, each motion practiced and calm. Beyond the abbey walls, life stirred differently. The peasants broke their fast with whatever the night had left, a crust of rye bread, a sliver of cheese. If fortune smiled, maybe an egg from the hen that had not yet stopped laying. In winter, the bread grew darker, heavier, thick with ground peas or beans, sometimes even moss or tree bark when grain ran thin. Still, they ate it without complaint, for hunger teaches gratitude, and gratitude teaches survival. The bread of the poor was not soft nor sweet, but it was honest, each bite earned by sweat, frost, and prayer. And yet, even here, there were rituals. The first piece broken with a murmur of thanks, the last crumb brushed from the table with care. For to waste bread was a sin. Bread was life itself. What stories must those loaves have held? If bread could speak, what might it tell? Of the hands that kneaded it, of the flour milled by stone turned by water, of the woman who rose before dawn to feed the family before the fields called her name. In the manor kitchens, breakfast took another shape. Golden loaves baked with honey, glistening with butter. Porridge flavoured with saffron or cinnamon for those who could afford such wonders. Servants scurried with jugs of milk, pitchers of ale, baskets of apples. The Lord's table was never empty. Yet even there, a curious balance remained. The church forbade meat on certain days, forbade indulgence before prayers. So the nobles feasted within limits, pretending restraint while savouring luxury. Behind politeness, some whispered that sin tastes sweetest when dressed in piety. Was it true? Perhaps. Yet even their feasts carried fear, for every indulgence demanded confession, every bite weighed against the soul. Still they ate and laughed and drank while the candles burned down to stubs. While outside, in the village, a mother blew gently on her child's porridge, cooling it before his first spoonful. Both acts, morning feasts in their own right. Two worlds divided by wealth, yet bound by the same hunger. Before long, the markets awoke. Carts creaked over cobblestones, merchants called softly through the fog, selling fish, cheese, herbs, salted meat. The smell of yeast and smoke mingled with the brine of the docks. The The baker's boy ran barefoot, his arms full of loaves, his face dusted white as if kissed by flour. Laughter echoed briefly from a corner, where two women bartered for onions, one offering prayer in exchange for promise. Each transaction small, yet vital. Each act, part of the great morning rhythm of survival. Above the roofs, the sun rose higher, gilding chimney smoke with gold. Somewhere in that light, a question lingered. How many mornings like this had the world seen? And how many more would it forget? By noon, the kitchens grew quiet again, their first labor done, bread cooling on shelves, pots emptied for now. Yet even in stillness, the scent remained, bread and ash and life itself. In the monastery, one novice lingered near the ovens, watching the embers glow red against the grey. He wondered, as we might wonder now, did the saints ever hunger? Did they too long for warmth, for taste, for comfort? He did not dare to ask aloud, but the question hung there in the heat, unanswered. A bird sang outside, a bell chimed again, and once more the day turned forward, by habit, by faith, by the slow ticking of hunger and grace. Throughout the villages, the same small miracles repeated over and over, hands breaking bread, lips whispering thanks, eyes lifting briefly to the light. It was nothing grand, yet somehow it was everything. For what is civilization, if not the act of waking, feeding, hoping, again and again, from night to morning, from hunger to peace? By midday, the air was alive with sound, the clang of pots, the murmur of bargaining, the low laughter of those who had sold enough to rest for a while. Sunlight glinted off metal and rippled through smoke that rose from the market fires. The scent was almost too much to bear. Wood smoke mixed with spiced meat, onions sizzling in shallow pans, fish laid open on glowing coals, oil snapping like distant rain. There were no clocks to measure the hour, only the way shadows shortened, and bells rang from the church tower, telling all that noon had come, and with it, hunger. The fast of morning was over. The world could eat again. And so they did. But what did a meal mean in the heart of the Middle Ages? What stories lay hidden behind those humble flames? Some say the market was not only a place of trade, but of transformation. Here, raw became cooked, grain became bread, life became sustenance. It was alchemy made visible, simple yet holy. Even the poorest traveler could close his eyes and feel rich for a moment just by breathing the air. Roasted chestnuts, golden and cracked, pears simmered in honey, barley cakes sweetened with dried fruit. These were the treasures of common folk. And though they might never taste sugar from the east or spices from the south, they still found joy in warmth, in sharing, in fullness that was its own kind of wealth. Near the square stood the alehouse, its door wide, its benches worn smooth by years of elbows and laughter. Inside, the air was thick with molten heat. A brewer stirred his vat, humming softly the rhythm of a tune older than his memory. Ale was safer than water, stronger too, yet for many it was the only drink they trusted. A pint with bread, a bowl of soup, a slice of salt pork, and the body could work till sunset. Men and women spoke here freely. Stories traded like coins, each tale worth as much as the ale that fueled it. Yet outside, by the fire, the real stories lived. They were cooked into every meal. A woman stirring stew might whisper to her child about the famine that came when she was young, when no fire burned and every pot was empty, when they boiled nettles and bark and still could not sleep for the sound of their own stomachs. Another vendor told of the year the fish turned sour and the river carried sickness through the town. He swore the saints had warned them in dreams that summer, but no one listened. Perhaps he believed it. Perhaps he only wanted to believe. Still, the listeners nodded in silence, for in every story, hunger was the same. It united them across rank, across sin, across fear. Even the lords in their halls had known the ache of a long winter without stores, and the quiet dread of waiting for spring. Hunger was the one truth the world could not deny. The market fires burned brighter, their light bouncing off copper pots, off eyes half closed in satisfaction. Food was the great equalizer, but also the great divider. For while the villagers dined on barley and beans, the nobility in the castle beyond the hill sat to feasts heavy with meats and sauces. A dozen courses, each one more lavish than the last. Yet even there, beneath gold and silk, hunger wore a different mask. What drove the lords to feast so fiercely, to turn every meal into a show? Was it greed or fear? Some historians say it was both. To eat extravagantly was to prove one's wealth, one's power, to remind the world that famine was for others, not for them. But deep down, perhaps they feared hunger more than any peasant feared it, feared the thought of being forgotten, of losing control, of slipping down the ladder of plenty. It is strange, isn't it, how food reveals the soul. Not through what we eat, but why we eat. To the poor, a meal meant survival. To the monks, it meant sacrifice. To the nobles, it meant pride. Yet in every case, it meant something more than flavor. It meant hope. At the far end of the square, the fishmongers laid out their wares. Eels coiled like ropes, carp glimmering silver under the noon light, the smell sharp and briny. Children ran past laughing, holding bits of flatbread wrapped around pieces of salted herring. The simplest of lunches, yet full of life. Salt was precious then, as precious as gold. It preserved the world, kept decay at bay, a miracle of crystal and sun. Some even believed it sacred, a gift from the sea itself. But imagine the effort behind that grain of salt. The miners descending into darkness, chiseling crystals from the earth. The traders driving carts for days under rain and dust. The labor of hundreds for a taste that now passes unnoticed by us. How easily we forget the work behind the simplest pleasure. The bell from the church tower rang again, slower this time, deeper. A sound that rolled through the streets and over the hills, calling not just to prayer, but to pause, to breathe. The merchants wiped sweat from their brows. The firekeepers banked their coals. The rush of the day softened into stillness for a while. Bread was shared, cheese passed from hand to hand, mugs lifted, eyes closed in small moments of peace. The smell of roasted herbs drifted across the square, thyme, sage, garlic, their perfume softening the sharper edges of smoke and toil. Even the dogs lay quiet, bellies full, tails twitching in dreams. Above them, the sun hung steady and bright, painting the roofs with heat. But already, shadows began to lengthen. Soon, it would be time to pack the stalls, to count the coins, to scrape the pots, to save what little could be saved before night returned. Still, the fires burned slow and steady, their smoke curling into the same sky that had watched these markets for centuries. Did anyone then wonder how long their way of life would last? Did anyone feel time slipping through the cracks of each meal, as though history itself were exhaling through the chimneys of their kitchens? Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. But the truth remains, every flame, every meal, every loaf left a trace. The scent of roasted meat might fade, but its story lingers even now, hidden in the pages of forgotten cookbooks, etched into the soot of ruined hearths, and in the rhythm of our own hunger for understanding. Perhaps that is why we look back, not just to know what they ate, but to feel what they felt. To stand once more by the market fires and listen as the world hums softly with the music of survival. Even as the smoke of midday kitchens drifted skyward and markets began to empty, the thought of indulgence lingered in the minds of many. For in the Middle Ages, eating was never merely eating. It was measured by faith and law, by ritual and restraint. When did indulgence begin? When did hunger end? What allowed one to savor meat and wine, while another scraped roots and cabbage from the pot? In monasteries, the rule was strict. Every morsel accounted for, every bite a matter of conscience. Yet temptation was patient and subtle. The monks understood that the body remembers flavor long after the tongue forgets. And some nights, when candles burned low, they would steal a taste of cheese hidden beneath linen, or a sip of watered wine, a small rebellion wrapped in prayer. Was it sin, or merely human curiosity that moved their lips? The peasants knew the rules differently. The church told them to fast on holy days, to abstain from meat, to eat only simple food. Yet the rules of indulgence were flexible when life pressed hard. For what was a rule if survival demanded bread with a smear of lard, or a few scraps of salted fish to quiet the gnawing of hunger? The lords of the manor observed feasts with ceremony and cunning, their tables groaning with roasted meats, spiced and gilded pies, wine pressed from grapes grown in distant lands, and sweets that shimmered with honey and almond. Some wondered why such abundance was necessary. Did they eat for pleasure or to show power? Perhaps both. Perhaps something deeper. The slow rhythm of slicing roasted pheasant, the careful portioning of sauces, the passing of goblets filled with spiced wine. Each act a message as much as a meal. Yet beneath it all, there was fear, the fear of scarcity, the knowledge that famine could arrive in the turn of a season, the winter that would strip the granaries bare, the river that might run dry. Even the wealthiest understood that indulgence was fragile, fleeting, and that the line between feast and famine was thinner than the crust of a freshly baked loaf. In villages, the quiet of the afternoon was broken only by the small tasks that remained. The grinding of grain, the fetching of water, the turning of dough, the preparation of what little could be saved for the next fast. And yet even here, indulgence existed in whispers. A slice of cheese hidden in a sleeve, a piece of bread warmed in the ashes before the fire, a cup of weak ale sipped slowly to ease the empty belly. These were small celebrations in the face of rules that could feel unyielding and harsh. In monasteries, novices learned to measure hunger against devotion, to see the act of eating as a moral exercise. Yet how does one teach the body to forget taste when it remembers every flavor it has known? When the bread of yesterday calls louder than the psalms of today? Sometimes small mercy was allowed. A bit of fish here, a cup of gruel there. A reminder that the divine was patient and understanding. The noble kitchens were a theatre, the chefs and stewards performing a ritual as old as the hall itself, roasting the game to perfection, glazing the pies, brushing honey on almonds, timing each dish to arrive as the bell rang to mark the proper hour. Yet even here, a young servant might glance at the feast and wonder how it tasted without the ceremony. If hunger could be satisfied with a single bite and still feel complete. The market fires of morning had cooled, but their memory remained. The aroma of bread drifting into alleys, reminding all that indulgence was not only in abundance, but in presence, in warmth, in community, in simply being fed and fed well. What did they eat when the feast was over and the fasting hours began again? The answer was not always written in the cookbooks or decreed by the priests. It was etched in the memory of the body, in the soft ache of the stomach, in the patient waiting for the next meal. And so, each act of indulgence became its own quiet lesson. The tasting of honey before the fast, the savoring of cheese in secret, the sharing of bread between children. Reminders that even in restraint, joy could be found. Indulgence was not a sin, but a question, to be answered carefully and with care. How long can one fast before the mind wanders to flavor? How much can the body endure before it begs for mercy? The Middle Ages were full of such questions, unanswered by scholars, yet lived and felt by all. Each bite weighed on conscience as much as it satisfied the stomach. In halls and cottages alike, the rhythm continued. Feast followed by fast, fast followed by feast. The body learned patience, the mind learned curiosity, the soul learned gratitude. In winter, the meals were heavier to sustain against the cold. In summer, lighter to avoid heat and spoilage. The timing of eating was as much about preservation as piety. Herbs and salt were currency. The taste of meat was a reminder that the body's needs were real. The rules of indulgence were layered, the visible rule commanded by priests, the invisible rule whispered by hunger. The unspoken rule written in the flicker of candlelight on the walls where cooks labored behind doors, the scent of roasting and baking their secret language. And what of those who broke the rules, quietly slipping bread into a sleeve or meat beneath a cloth? Perhaps the world did not see, but the body remembered, and remembered well. The taste lingered long after the act was done. The church would call it sin, the cook would call it survival. The child would call it warmth, and perhaps all were right. For indulgence is a question as much as it is an act. And in the quiet moments of the night after the last meal, the body learned the rhythm of patience, the mind learned the flavor of restraint, and the heart learned to recognize that every morsel carried memory, every bite contained history. In the slow unfolding of medieval days, between hunger and satisfaction, between rule and rebellion, between bread and wine, the people of that time lived fully, feeling each sensation completely, wondering each question quietly, observing the delicate dance between survival and delight, knowing that food was more than nourishment. It was a lesson in life, a mirror of faith, a bridge between body and soul. Even as the village sank into darkness, the world of food did not fully sleep. The hours before dawn carried a secret life hidden from the eyes of most. A soft murmur of spoons in quiet kitchens, the slow hiss of fat on embers, a faint aroma of bread or roasted root rising through shutters and thatch. It was the hour when hunger whispered louder than devotion, when the body demanded what the rules denied. Yet what is a stolen taste if not a reminder that life persists even under restraint? Some nights, a mother leaned close to the dying fire. She lifted a small pot hidden beneath a cloth, its contents modest but precious. Barley softened with milk, a few chopped herbs, a pinch of salt. She lifted a spoon and tasted cautiously, listening for movement elsewhere in the cottage. Her child stirred in sleep, her husband shifted, but made no sound. A stolen taste, a quiet rebellion, a reassurance that the world still offered warmth and flavor. What courage it took to break a rule so small and yet so heavy in meaning. For in the Middle Ages, every bite carried weight, even in secret. The monks were not immune to this rhythm of covert indulgence. In the stone dormitories, the novices listened to the fire crackle in the kitchen below. Some dared to slip from their benches when the eyes of older brothers were averted. A sip of gruel, a crust of bread, a taste so fleeting yet so profound. The rules dictated fasting, yet the human body remembered and demanded the memory of nourishment. In manor houses, the story was different but similar. The kitchens were alive under torchlight late into the night. The cooks tested sauces, brushed honey on almonds, stirred pots for the next day. A lad or a maid might dip a finger into thickened cream, savouring sweetness that no lord would ever know. They called it tasting, yet it was something more than taste. It was learning, survival, and a reminder that even in abundance, caution and curiosity coexisted. The market fires of morning seemed a distant memory, yet some vendors had reason to return even after dark. A baker might rise to feed the night watch. A porter might steal a loaf or two to hide beneath a cloak for a long journey. The smell of yeast still warm, still comforting, still a small rebellion against the silence of fasting. And so the night carried its secrets. Some whispered in corners of cottages, others in monasteries, still more in the bowels of castles behind locked doors. The hidden world of food was alive with questions. How much can one endure before the taste of bread becomes unbearable? How far will one go to feel warmth in the belly? How does the heart weigh morality against hunger? Each stolen morsel, each secret sip, each hidden crust became a lesson remembered in muscle and memory. The smell of roasted root and boiling barley curled through the dark alleys of villages, the smoke of kitchens drifting into mist like a soft reminder that the body had not forgotten the world's sustenance. In small cottages by the hearth, a woman hummed a quiet tune as she stirred the last of her stew. She wondered if the saints understood that survival sometimes required small acts of indulgence. She knew the priests would call it sin. She knew the children would not understand. Yet the act itself was a comfort. It tied her to life. to family, to warmth. In monasteries, some novices argued softly about what counted as indulgence. A crumb too many, a sip of ale, a nibble of cheese. Each act weighed in silence and conscience. One brother whispered to another, "Perhaps all indulgence is a test. Perhaps the body knows better than the soul." Yet in the shadows, no one judged except the self. The nobility in their halls also lived by secret indulgence, servants passing dishes to their mouths when eyes were elsewhere, tasting sauces when no one watched. It was a world layered with rules and rebellions, observation and secrecy, silence and flavor. The fires burned low in kitchens. The coals glowed deep red. The night stretched and deepened, and yet life moved in hidden rhythms. A pot thickened on the hearth, a loaf rested beneath cloth. A fish was salted for tomorrow, but tonight it rested too. Each act small and deliberate, a meditation in its own right. The wind whispered against the shutters. The dogs lay curled in corners, dreaming of scraps. The faint sound of footsteps echoed in alleys, a passerby returning home, perhaps from a late errand, perhaps just pacing to quiet the ache of hunger. The moon cast pale light through the trees, illuminating the smoke curling from chimneys, the scent of roasted roots, of boiled grains, of sweetened honey. It was everywhere, yet nowhere at once. The night was not lonely, it was alive. The secrets of those hours carried lessons for those patient enough to notice. Even small acts of indulgence were profound, for they reminded people that rules were human, hunger was natural, and survival was itself a sacred rhythm. In the silence of midnight kitchens, hidden behind locked doors, beneath cloaks, and under lids, food was transformed into comfort, into hope, into quiet joy. Each bite tasted of patience. Each sip of broth carried memory. The world in those hours moved slowly. Its heartbeat the crackle of coals, the murmur of water, the hiss of oil over heat, the bending of a hand to gather a root or a slice of bread. Even the simplest act became a meditation, a bridge between body and soul. Questions lingered in the smoke of midnight. What does hunger teach about faith? What does taste teach about morality? How do the rules of men intersect with the needs of the body? Even now one can imagine standing in the shadows of a medieval kitchen, the warmth of coals on the face, the faint scent of roasted grains rising into the night. Listening closely to the soft rhythm of life hidden from view, yet essential to existence. The night held mysteries, but it also held lessons. Every crumb, every sip, every secret morsel carried within it a story of survival, of curiosity, of humanity itself. For the Middle Ages were full of quiet revolutions of the stomach, small victories against time and rule. The hidden world of food, of midnight snacks and secret indulgence, reminded all who partook that life is sustained not only by rule, but also by the small courage to feed the body and nurture the spirit. As the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, the village exhaled a soft sigh of relief. The fields darkened with shadows, the air cooled, and the smoke of evening fires drifted lazily toward the thatched roofs. The scent of barley and bread still lingered from the morning and midday meals, mingling now with the aroma of roasting roots and softened cheese. The day had been long but not hurried, and there was a gentle satisfaction in the slow closing of chores. The farmers returned from the fields, dirt and sweat marking their garments, their feet tired, but their hands still capable of turning the last handfuls of soil before night. The question lingered. What did it mean to rest after labor? How did the body measure its day when hours were counted by sun and task rather than clock and decree? The hearths became the center of reflection. In cottages, the fire was banked low, embers glowing softly, a pot of stew simmering quietly for the next meal or for the few still awake. The children gathered near it, their eyes heavy with fatigue, their fingers tracing the rough edges of bread or the smooth curve of a wooden spoon. A mother's hand brushed hair from a tired forehead, a father's call to bed gentle and unhurried, yet firm in its rhythm. The simple acts of care carried meaning beyond mere survival. In the monastery, the bells rang for evening prayer, and the brothers gathered in silence. The stone floors were cold under bare feet. the flicker of candlelight dancing along arches and columns. The novices stood in rows, the elder monks moving between them, their faces calm. The chanting rose and fell like wind over hills and valleys, each note a soft embrace of memory and devotion. The rules were strict, yet in their strictness there was comfort, a known rhythm, a way of measuring days and deeds. The kitchens had cooled, their fires banked, the remaining bread set aside for the morning. The taste of small indulgences lingered in memory, yet restraint was observed and respected. The nobility in their halls slowed their pace as well. Servants wiped counters, polished silver, and stacked dishes. The great ovens cooled as coals died down. The lords lingered at tables, sipping ale or water, their conversations soft, the laughter less boisterous than at midday. Their thoughts drifted to what had been eaten, what had been enjoyed, and what remained for tomorrow. Even in luxury, there was the quiet of reflection, a recognition that every bite carried weight, every morsel a story. The question remained for them too. What is the purpose of abundance, if not to be savoured with care? The markets were emptying, carts creaking slowly as traders packed their goods. The streets quieted, the dogs curled at doorways, and the wind whispered through the alleyways, carrying faint scents of herbs, smoke, and softened meat. The world seemed to pause for a moment, each act of survival, each ritual of sustenance, leaving a residue of peace that hung in the evening. The villagers, the monks, the lords, each in their own way, were connected by the simple act of feeding the body and mind. The reflection came not just from food, but from the rhythms that guided life. The sun dipped lower, painting windows with soft amber light. Shadows lengthened across stone and wood. The bell of the church tower tolled once again, a slow, resonant note that reminded all that the day was ending and the night would soon claim its dominion. The kitchens, now quiet, held traces of the day's work, the smell of roasted herbs and baking bread lingering in the air, a reminder that every meal had been made with care, every morsel attended with thought and attention. Even small acts had meaning. The firelight glowed warmly against the walls, the coals settling into a calm rhythm, like the heartbeat of the day itself. One could almost hear the echoes of those who had worked before, the memory of meals past, the whisper of laughter and hunger, a history folded into the very walls of the hearths. The evening offered time for contemplation. Did the monks think of the people beyond the abbey gates? Did the peasants imagine a life beyond the fields? Did the lords ever wonder about the hands that had prepared their meals so carefully? The questions floated in the smoke and the candlelight. The answers were soft, perhaps unknowable. Yet the act of asking was part of the rhythm of the day. The villagers gathered what they would need for the night: water drawn from wells, bread saved for tomorrow, cheese wrapped and stored, fire tended for warmth and cooking. The small decisions of daily life carried weight that historians would never measure, yet they were central to existence. The children, their bellies full, drifted to sleep. The novices in their dormitories lay quietly, recalling the taste of bread and cheese, the warmth of soup, the small joys that punctuated their strict routines. The lords retired to chambers, their bodies heavy with food, their minds perhaps wandering to tomorrow's feasts. The wind rose slightly through the trees, the smoke from chimneys twisting into the night sky. Stars appeared slowly, like pinpricks of silver in deep blue. A dog barked once, then ceased. The village fell into a soft, reflective silence. It was the time of recollection, of gratitude for the day's labor, for survival, for nourishment. The hearths glowed dimly but persistently, a gentle reminder that even when the world sleeps, warmth remains. Even when the body tires, the memory of flavor lingers. Even when voices grow quiet, the lessons of the day endure. They were woven into these final hours: patience, curiosity, indulgence, restraint, wonder, all measured not in clocks, but in taste and reflection. The night promised more than darkness. It promised continuation, a cycle of meals, labor, thought, and sleep that had been observed for generations and would continue long after the voices of those present were forgotten. The Middle Ages were not only a time of struggle, but of quiet triumphs in the simple acts of feeding oneself, and others in observing rules and bending them slightly in small indulgences and large in savoring flavor and honoring restraint. The day ended with hearts and stomachs full, or at least filled with hope. A final ember glowed against the hearth, a final whisper of smoke rising toward the stars. And in that glow and that whisper, the medieval world breathed slowly and peacefully, ready for the night to deepen, ready for dreams to settle across village, monastery, and manor. As darkness thickened across the village, the world became hushed, yet not completely still. Some walked under the moon's pale glow, their footsteps soft over cobblestones and dirt paths. The bell had tolled its evening call, yet a rhythm persisted for those whose duty never slept. The night watch began its quiet march along walls and streets, each man and boy alert, their hands resting lightly on wooden staffs, their eyes scanning shadows and corners, not only for the threat of thief or wolf, but for the order of the village itself. Theirs was a delicate task, the preservation of peace, the guardianship of life, while others rested. Yet even they were moved by hunger. The stomach remembers what the mind might forget. The wind carried the faint scent of bread cooling in windows, the soft smoke of embers from cottages, and the distant aroma of salted fish from the market square. Even in darkness, these scents called quietly to those on watch. How did one remain vigilant against both danger and desire? How does discipline coexist with necessity? The watchmen paused near the abbey wall, the stone cold under their fingers, moonlight casting silver along moss and ivy. The novices inside slept lightly, their breathing soft and even. The monks' shadows flickered through narrow windows, quiet as prayer. The watchman's eyes followed every movement, the soft brush of animal or leaf, the shift of a branch against the wind, every detail meaningful in a time when even the smallest disturbance might carry consequence. Yet hunger was not forgotten. The night watchmen shared quietly among themselves, a crust of bread hidden in a pocket, a sip of water, a taste of ale from a flask, small rituals against the empty hours that passed slowly from dusk toward the midnight bell. The manor's night stewards moved with a different rhythm, their tasks quieter, but no less significant. They moved through corridors polishing silver, restocking plates, checking larders and wine casks. The kitchens, now dark, had become places of preparation for tomorrow. The smell of herbs from small sachets, the faint lingering aroma of roasted meat, the warmth of ovens now cooling, all reminders that work never fully ceased and that hunger never fully rested in the body. How much of life passes unobserved, yet remains essential to survival? The village dogs shifted, stirred, and curled again into deeper sleep, guarding and dreaming. The villagers' homes lay dark, the smoke from hearths curling into the sky like memory itself. Each chimney a faint beacon of life, of warmth, of continuity. In monasteries, the night was sacred even in labor. The novices tending fires or preparing water for morning felt each movement as devotion. Every scoop of ashes, every stirring of a pot was a small prayer whispered to the divine. For care, for patience, for guidance. What lessons were learned in quiet acts alone? How much does the soul measure itself in unseen labor, in moments when no one watches? The lords themselves rarely wandered in these hours, yet the echoes of their presence lingered in silent halls. A steward might pause, listening to the faint rustle of silk, the distant footfall of an unseen lord moving to inspect a window, a door, a servant's labor, unnoticed yet remembered. The night held a mirror of desire and restraint for all who moved within it. The question persisted: what is the balance between duty and need, between hunger and conscience? The streets were not completely empty. The blacksmith's apprentice returned from a late errand, sparks of fading fire still clinging to iron as he carried the last tools back to the forge. A baker emerged briefly from shadows to retrieve dough set to rest for the morning and inhale the faint scent of yeast rising through the night. Even the smallest acts carried significance, for history is often found in unnoticed moments. The wind stirred over rooftops and trees, carrying with it stories of endurance, of care, of human curiosity. Even the moon seemed to pause in its arc, casting a silver gaze on sleeping faces, on watchful eyes, on glimmering hearths within walls. The night had a pulse, soft but steady, like the rhythm of a heartbeat, unhurried, persistent, alive. Each ember in a fireplace, each glowing lantern, each flicker of candlelight formed a note in a quiet nocturne played for the ears of those patient enough to listen. The midnight hour approached, the air thick with the scent of cooling bread and roasting root, softened meat, and the faint tang of salted fish. The watchmen paused, their breaths visible in the cool night, hands resting on staffs, minds drifting to the taste of simple food, the warmth of stolen indulgence. The novices remembered the sweetness of small morsels hidden from view, the taste lingering longer than the memory of discipline. In the manor, a young page quietly sampled a slice of leftover cheese before hiding it beneath his tunic. A small act of courage and pleasure, fleeting yet immortal in its intimacy. The village clock struck softly, the distant chime echoing through empty streets and quiet homes. The rhythm of night itself seemed to answer the question of purpose, the labor, the vigilance, the hunger, the indulgence, each moment intertwined into a web of life observed in darkness, yet alive with meaning. How many nights had this pattern repeated, unseen, unrecorded, essential to survival? How many more would follow? The moon traced its path across the sky, shadows shifting over stone and thatch. The stars twinkled above like quiet witnesses to human persistence, to the small acts that defined existence. In silence, the night watchman moved again, slowly, deliberately, each footstep a meditation, each glance a measure of care. They were the guardians not only of safety, but of continuity, of life as it unfolded in quiet moments. The world in these hours seemed both fragile and eternal. Every ember, every breath, every quiet sip of water or hidden crust was a note in the nocturnal song of survival. The questions lingered, yet softened in the rhythm of midnight. How does hunger teach patience? How does vigilance teach reflection? How does life persist even in darkness? How does history breathe in unseen acts? And in the stillness of the village, the abbey, and the manor, the night carried all answers, softly wrapped in smoke, ember glow, and the quiet satisfaction of bodies and minds tended, fed, and vigilant. As the night deepened and the moon traced its slow arc across the sky, the village exhaled its last breaths of wakefulness. The streets, once alive with shadowed footsteps, quieted entirely. The smoke from hearths drifted upward, a soft fragrance of roasted roots and dried herbs lingering like memory in the air. The dogs curled deeper in corners, tails twitching lightly as dreams stirred beneath fur. The human world mirrored this quiet pulse. Those who had labored, eaten and watched now felt the gentle pull of drowsiness tugging at eyelids and limbs. How did they understand sleep in those times? Did they measure it by hours, by the position of the moon, by the last flicker of a dying ember in a hearth, or by the whisper of a prayer that trailed off into silence? The children, tucked beneath rough woolen blankets, stirred softly, murmuring fragments of the day. Their dreams were colored by taste, touch, and scent. The memory of barley bread, roasted chestnuts, the hint of salted fish, even the laughter of the market square mingled with images conjured by the mind in darkness. Dreams were believed by some to be more than imagination, to carry warnings or messages from saints, spirits, or ancestors. The novices in their dormitories lay in straight lines, robes folded carefully beneath them, eyes closing slowly as sleep approached. A candle flickered low nearby, illuminating the stone in soft, warm tones. They listened to the rhythm of their own breathing, to the subtle creak of floorboards, to the distant murmur of a monk moving in the kitchen for water, or a last check of coals in the fire. What did they dream of? Did they taste bread in sleep? Did they see visions of harvest fields or endless candlelight? The lords in their halls rested in chambers vast and quiet, their beds thick with furs and blankets, the flicker of a single candle casting long shadows over tapestries, depicting hunts and feasts. The taste of indulgence lingered on their tongues, the echo of meals and sweets still vivid as sleep descended. Each servant had left traces of themselves in the rooms, for those awake and those dreaming alike. A spoon, half washed, a mug with residue of ale, a loaf resting on a table, all small signs of life and care that mingled with shadows. The rhythm of the night was punctuated only by faint sounds, a dog shifting, wind through a shutter, the creak of a floorboard settling into stillness. Even the rivers nearby whispered quietly under moonlight, carrying reflections of stars, their motion slow, gentle, and eternal. The villagers, exhausted from labor and indulgence, embraced sleep as a necessity, not only for the body, but for the mind and spirit. In cold winters, they added extra layers of clothing, tucked animals nearby for warmth, and pulled blankets close to soften the chill in stone cottages. Sleep was intertwined with survival, yet it was also intertwined with ritual. Prayers whispered before closing eyes, a small gesture that bridged the human and divine. The abbey's bells rang for a single midnight office, and the monks moved briefly, carefully, silently, their chanting soft as a lullaby to those asleep below the heavy stone walls. What did they hope to carry into sleep? A sense of safety, a taste of yesterday's meals, the quiet memory of hands working over hearths and fields, or perhaps the faint echo of songs sung long before their own time. The night watchmen had completed their rounds and now lay under the same moon, their bodies heavy but minds alert to the gentle tug of dreams. Even they, hardened by vigilance, succumbed eventually to the softness of night. The warmth of embers in hearths was mirrored in the warmth of bodies against straw and blankets. The manor's corridors held only occasional movement, a steward checking a locked door, a cat weaving silently between legs. The great halls seemed almost abandoned, yet every detail carried meaning. A polished surface, a carefully folded cloth, a final sip of ale, all remnants of human presence that would linger into morning, and perhaps even into memory. The night was a teacher, teaching patience, reflection, and surrender to what cannot be controlled. How does one let go of the day, of hunger, of labor, of responsibility, and allow sleep to claim the body, yet in doing so, preserve memory, taste, and life itself? Each village home, each abbey dormitory, each manor chamber was a small universe where history, routine, and imagination merged. The quiet, the darkness, the subtle sense of food and smoke all worked together to soothe the body into drowsiness, to teach the mind to wander without fear. The children dreamed of playful moments in markets, of the morning, of stolen bites and laughter shared in secret. The novices dreamed of devotion and indulgence intertwined, the taste of bread lingering on the tongue even in dreams. The watchmen's dreams were more practical, images of the paths they had walked, the shadows they had observed, yet even these were colored by imagination. The lords dreamed of feasts, yet also of stewardship, of maintaining abundance without loss. How strange it is that in sleep, even the powerful and the powerless shared a common experience of vulnerability, of rest and renewal. The wind rose gently through trees, the scent of herbs carried faintly through shuttered windows. The embers in hearths glowed a softer red as the coal settled into calm. The river murmured endlessly outside, reflecting the stars in faint ripples. The night's rhythm was complete in small, unnoticed gestures. The turning of a loaf on a hearth, the closing of a door, the careful tucking of a blanket over a child. The quiet exhalation of a breath before sleep claims it all. History is woven into these moments. The taste of food, the warmth of fire, the pull of drowsiness, the whisper of prayer and reflection, all converging to sustain body, mind, and spirit. Even in darkness, the continuity of life is evident. The same moon that shone on the abbeys and cottages shone on fields now empty of labourers, yet alive in memory. In dreams, the Middle Ages were full of such moments, quiet, rich, and essential, for they carried survival and meaning intertwined. The question remains for the modern observer: How did the taste of yesterday's bread linger in dreams? How did the smell of roasted meat echo in memory? How did the mind reconcile hunger with indulgence? How did sleep teach them the art of balance between body and soul? As the night deepened, all were held in its gentle rhythm. Dreams, drowsiness, reflection, and rest, all flowing together as one. Each home, each hearth, each heart was united in the universal need to close eyes, surrender to darkness, and trust that morning would come with its own scents, sounds, and taste. As the first pale light of dawn brushed the thatched roofs of villages and the stone walls of abbeys, the world shifted gently from quiet slumber to the soft stirrings of life. The wind carried a cooler breath tinged with dew, the scent of damp earth mingling with the faint smoke of dying embers from hearths that had burned low through the night. Birds began to call softly from branches, their songs hesitant and slow, yet carrying a promise of day. What does awakening feel like when measured not by clocks, but by light, by smell, by sound, by the movement of the body itself? The villagers stirred slowly. Children stretched beneath rough woolen blankets, yawning and blinking at the soft glow through shuttered windows. Mothers and fathers rose to stoke the fire, draw water from the well, and prepare the first meals of the day. The kitchens were alive again, the rhythm of labor resuming without hurry, yet with purpose. The smell of barley boiling in water drifted through cottages. The aroma of bread warming over coals mingled with roasted roots and herbs. The taste of the first sip of ale or milk carried quiet satisfaction, a reward for surviving the darkness, for indulgence tempered by fasting. What did it mean to begin the day with nourishment prepared by hands steeped in tradition, by the memory of countless mornings before? The abbey awoke in its own rhythm. Novices rose to the bell, their robes shifting softly across stone floors, breath forming faint clouds in the cool air. The monks moved through corridors quietly, each step measured, each gesture deliberate, as they gathered for morning prayers. Yet even prayer was followed by sustenance for body and mind. The kitchens behind stone walls were filled with preparation. Porridge, small loaves of bread, herbs and fruits preserved from earlier seasons, each act imbued with ritual and care. What lessons did the novices take from preparing food for themselves and others? How did the taste of milk or bread remind them of devotion and human need? In manor houses, the early light revealed polished tables, empty but ready. Servants moved silently, clearing dishes from the night before, storing remaining food for midday. The smell of honey, nuts, and spiced wine lingered faintly in corridors, a reminder of feasts past, yet already the day demanded attention. The lords stirred slowly beneath furs and blankets, the taste of indulgence lingering on their tongues. Their thoughts drifted to the day ahead, yet even they rose to the rhythms of duty and sustenance. The market squares awakened as well. Vendors unpacked their carts, the aroma of fresh bread, cheeses, and smoked meats mingling with the crisp morning air. The sound of wheels on cobblestones, of water drawn from wells, of animals shifting and lowing, created a symphony of movement, a daily chorus of survival and routine. The villagers, young and old, prepared to leave their homes for fields and trades, the day's work awaiting their hands. The rhythm of labor tied to the rhythm of food, tied to the rhythm of life. The sun rose higher, light glinting on dew-soaked fields, stone walls, and polished utensils, each reflection a reminder that every day carried the possibility of sustenance and joy. The questions persisted quietly in the morning air. What does the body remember from sleep? How does the taste of yesterday linger in the first bite of bread? How does the mind reconcile hunger and indulgence? As work began again, each act of preparing food, each sip, and each bite became an intimate measure of care and intention. The kitchens were full of motion, yet full of ritual. Each stirring of porridge, each kneading of dough, each cutting of herbs became a meditation in action. Smoke curled upward from pots on low fires, carrying scents that guided the senses and memory. The wind shifted gently, bringing in the fragrance of wet earth and growing grain. The day's first meal would be simple yet sustaining: barley bread, cheese, a bit of milk or ale, perhaps a slice of root roasted over embers. The taste, though modest, carried warmth, energy, and quiet beauty, even in scarcity. The lords and ladies of manor houses tasted their breakfasts slowly, savouring the spices and meats prepared by careful hands. They understood, perhaps unconsciously, that sustenance was as much about mind and heart as it was about body. The novices, hands chilled by stone floors and early air, drank their porridge or watered ale quietly, aware that each morsel was a gift and a lesson. The rhythm of awakening, of feeding, of preparing for labour continued in villages, in monasteries, in manors. The repetition of this cycle created a world that was predictable yet alive, full of small wonders, full of human resilience, full of taste and memory. The questions lingered in every movement and every scent. How does one balance hunger and gratitude? How does labour become meditation? How does taste become memory? Even the animals sensed the turning of the day. The cows lowed softly, the chickens stirred, the dogs shifted near hearths, anticipating the warmth and sustenance that humans would provide. The light grew stronger, dew evaporating slowly under the sun's gaze. Each home, each hearth, each heart began again the day, aware of the past night and preparing for the next meal. The markets were filled with the scent of fresh bread, the warmth of milk, the tang of cheese, the smoke of salted fish, yet also the subtle fragrances of preserved herbs, dried roots, and stored fruits. The act of eating, of preparing food, of tasting, of remembering, all was woven into the fabric of daily existence. The Middle Ages were full of these quiet miracles. In small moments of awakening, in the first bite of bread, in the first sip of milk, in the memory of yesterday's meal, in the gentle movement from sleep to work. In each home, monastery and manor, the rhythm of life and sustenance continued uninterrupted, a song of labour, taste, reflection, and survival, resonating through centuries in every ember, every hearth, every loaf of bread, and every sip of milk. With morning light spreading across the village, the fields and workshops stirred into motion. Villagers emerged from cottages, their hands calloused, their feet bare or clad in simple leather, eyes still half closed, yet alert to the day ahead. The rhythm of work was intertwined with sustenance and survival. A farmer lifted his plough over the damp earth, the wooden handles smooth from years of use. The oxen groaned softly, stepping carefully in furrows freshly carved into soil. Dew clung to grasses and roots, shimmering like tiny jewels under the rising sun. What does it mean to feel the soil beneath your hands, to sense the weight of earth, the resistance of roots, the smell of wet clay? The act of working the land was as much communion as necessity, each movement deliberate, each gesture measured for both efficiency and care. Women carried baskets of grain to the mill, their fingers brushing against kernels harvested days before. The wind carried the faint aroma of crushed barley, mingling with smoke from nearby hearths. How much of life is contained in a handful of grain? How much knowledge, passed through generations, can be held in touch, in taste, in scent? In the abbey, novices assisted in workshops, preparing tools, repairing garments, polishing vessels. Each small labour carried a lesson. Fingers learned rhythm, patience and precision. The mind observed order and consequence. How did the act of creation, of repair, of careful tending, feed both body and spirit? The blacksmith struck iron over the anvil, sparks flying like tiny stars into the air, the hammer's rhythm steady, predictable, comforting. The scent of heated metal mingled with smoke and oil. Apprentices watched closely, learning not only craft but endurance, focus, and pride in labour. The artisan's workshop, though noisy, was meditative in its own way. Each strike of hammer, each fold of cloth, each stroke of paint on wood, a quiet reflection of human ingenuity and attention. Peasants returned to the fields to tend vegetables, gather herbs, and check on livestock. Each day a repetition of survival and a practice of care. The sun climbed higher, warming shoulders, illuminating textures of leaves, soil, and stone. The air carried a faint mixture of sweat, earth, and fresh vegetation, every scent a reminder that life was immediate and tactile, that survival depended not only on planning but on constant attention and presence. Monasteries echoed with quiet chants, even as labor continued in the scriptorium or gardens. Monks balanced prayer with tending herbs, vegetables, and small animals that provided milk and eggs. The act of labor became devotion, each movement intentional, each harvest an offering. Hands that tilled, kneaded, polished, and prepared also guided the mind toward reflection and the spirit toward understanding. How does one balance necessity and ritual? How does labor become meditation? The villagers paused at midday to taste what had been prepared over morning fires. A crust of bread, softened cheese, a sip of ale, roasted roots. Even the simplest meal carried nourishment beyond hunger. The taste reminded them of hours of labor past and work yet to come. The abbey shared similar sustenance, though in smaller portions. Novices tasted porridge and bread with gratitude, minds attuned to subtle lessons in moderation, patience, and appreciation. The blacksmith wiped sweat from his brow and dipped bread into a pot of pottage. The apprentice's eyes widened at the simple joy of flavor, the connection between effort and reward evident in every bite. In manor houses, the lords observed the same rhythm differently. Servants prepared meals with care, ensuring each element met expectation and tradition. The lords consumed, savoring taste and quality, yet often unaware of the physical toil that supported their abundance. The afternoon brought continuation. The sun climbed higher, shadows shifting slowly across earth and stone. Farmers rested briefly in the shade of trees, tasting water drawn from cool wells, observing growth of crops and livestock. Artisans paused to sharpen tools and adjust materials. Novices reflected quietly on lessons learned in practice, observing not only labor, but the connection of work to survival and spirituality. The texture of soil beneath fingers, the weight of a hammer, the scent of herbs and roasted grains. All carried knowledge remembered not in books, but in body and memory. The market began to stir mid-afternoon. Carts rolled with produce, bread, and cured meats. The air thick with fragrance, conversation, the soft clatter of utensils, the occasional laughter or exclamation. The rhythm of daily life persisted through sight, sound, and smell. Villagers, monks, artisans, and lords were bound together in a subtle web through food, work, and awareness. As the day matured, light softened, shadows stretched long across fields and courtyards. The wind carried the scent of newly cut herbs and roasting bread through open windows and doors. Hands that labored paused briefly, noticing scent, texture, temperature. The subtle pleasures that often went unnoticed, yet were essential to understanding the world. Questions persisted in the gentle rhythm of work. How does effort translate to satisfaction? How does creation feed not only the body but the spirit? How is survival entwined with reflection? The day unfolded slowly, a quiet conversation between body, mind, and environment. A loaf of bread kneaded, a root roasted, a tool polished, a fur cleaned. Simple acts, yet each echoing centuries of human care and ingenuity. As the sun began its descent toward evening, villagers' backs bent with satisfaction, their faces marked with sweat and dust. Apprentices and artisans tidied workspaces, aware that every tool, every material, every trace of effort mattered in the rhythm of life. The abbey's novices concluded tasks, monks offering quiet blessing over gathered vegetables, baked bread, and stirred pots. The day's labor gave way to reflection, preparation for evening, and the promise of sustenance yet to come. The Middle Ages were not only defined by scarcity or struggle, but by the quiet triumphs of hands that labored with care, awareness, and devotion in fields, workshops, kitchens, and monasteries. The rhythm of labor, taste, reflection, and survival intertwined seamlessly. Every action mattered, every effort remembered, in body, mind, and spirit, quietly guiding the day forward toward evening and rest. As the sun began its slow descent, the village settled into a softer rhythm. The air, warmed by lingering daylight, cooled gently with the evening breeze. Cobblestones and earthen paths glowed faintly in amber light. Farmers returned from the fields, their hands still fragrant with soil and herbs. The oxen were led to barns, lowing softly, their breath mingling with the scent of drying hay. Women stirred slowly, preparing evening meals over low embers. The aroma of roasted vegetables and herbs drifted through open windows, mingling with the lingering smell of baked bread and smoked meats. What did it mean to gather in the evening, to taste, to remember, to share after hours of labor? Kitchens became stages of quiet anticipation. Each pot stirred, each fire adjusted, each movement deliberate. In the abbey, novice monks prepared simple bread and porridge, their hands moving in unison. Each action was meditation, each scoop of flour, each kneading of dough, a gentle affirmation of sustenance and devotion. The Lord's halls began to fill with faint sounds of movement. Servants carried platters carefully, balancing the weight of silver and ceramic, the warmth of food radiating through their palms and across the cool air. The first dishes were placed upon long wooden tables, the smell of honey, roasted root vegetables, spiced meats, and fresh bread mingling to create a quiet, intoxicating perfume. Villagers gathered in cottages around fires, sharing not only food, but the stories of the day. Children laughed quietly, recounting playful mischief. Adults exchanged news and observations, voices soft in the evening light. The taste of each morsel seemed heightened by the act of sharing, by the awareness that hunger had been answered, labor rewarded. How did they understand this ritual of communal eating? Did it teach gratitude, patience, memory, or simply the quiet joy of human company? In manor houses, the evening meal was more structured. Lords and ladies partook in courses prepared with care by skilled cooks. Flavors were richer, spiced subtly to evoke trade and distant lands. Yet even here, the meal connected them to the rhythm of labor and sustenance. Servants moving quietly behind screens were acutely aware of each gesture, each plate, each serving, a meditation in motion, their hands steady, their minds attuned to the needs of others. The abbey's novices gathered for supper after prayers. The meal, simple yet nourishing, bread, cheese, lightly stewed vegetables, became a lesson in moderation and awareness. Eating became a reflection on the day's labor, an affirmation of patience and endurance. Candlelight flickered on walls, illuminating faces, utensils, and hearths. Firelight reflected in eyes, creating warmth and intimacy even in stone-walled rooms or modest cottages. The sensory experience was complete. The taste of roasted roots mingling with the subtle bitterness of herbs. The warmth of freshly baked bread complementing a cool sip of ale or milk. Textures and flavors lingered long in memory and imagination. The wind shifted softly through open windows, carrying the faint scent of lavender, rosemary, and the evening river's dampness. Each inhalation reminded inhabitants of the world beyond kitchens, cottages, and halls, yet inseparable from the day's labor and nourishment. Children's voices softened. Stories gave way to quiet reflection. Adults leaned back, tasting the last crumbs, savoring warmth, flavor, and presence. Novice monks moved with reverence, even in simple acts of eating. Each bite a reminder of care. Each sip a bridge between body and spirit. Questions arose softly. How does food teach patience and reflection? How does taste become memory? How does sharing shape community? Village dogs shifted softly in corners, tails curling. Cats wandered quietly among hearths, settling near warmth. Animals, like humans, participated in the rhythm of life and sustenance, observing, sensing, resting. The night grew cooler. Shadows lengthened across stone walls and thatched roofs. The orange glow of the setting sun mingled with firelight inside homes and halls. Candlelight flickered, creating a soft rhythm, dancing across faces, tables, and utensils. Each movement was a gentle punctuation to the day's unfolding narrative. Even the smallest details mattered. The arrangement of bread on a platter, the pouring of ale into wooden cups, the careful cutting of cheese, the timing of each action, a reflection of attentiveness and care. After the meal, villagers paused. Some washed dishes, others rested hands on laps, leaning against walls, gazing toward windows. The wind brought faint whispers from river and fields, carrying scents of dew, damp earth, and wildflowers. The abbey's novices reflected quietly on the day's lessons, their minds attuned to the subtleties of labor, taste, and devotion. Lords and ladies retreated to private chambers, or conversed over the final sips of wine. Servants tidied the hall, mindful of remnants of effort and care. Even in these quiet hours, every act of preparation, every shared bite, every reflection of taste contributed to continuity, memory, and gratitude. The smell of roasted roots, baked bread, herbs, and smoke remained faintly in the air, even after plates were cleared. The lingering fragrance became a subtle reminder of human care and presence. The day's labor and sustenance converged in these final moments of communal gathering. Each bite, each sip, each whispered word wove a tapestry of connection and reflection. Even in quiet domestic moments, questions persisted softly. How does sharing amplify the satisfaction of food? How does reflection deepen the understanding of labor and effort? How does community sustain both body and spirit? As night approached, light faded further. Amber softened into twilight. Candles flickered. Fires crackled gently. Shadows lengthened and merged. Villagers, novices, lords and servants alike carried the quiet satisfaction of nourishment and reflection. The rhythm of the day began to ebb, preparing body and mind for rest and dreams. The evening feast was more than food. It was ritual, reflection, and connection. Flavors, scents, and warmth lingered as a subtle lullaby, preparing the village, abbey, and manor for sleep. The Middle Ages were alive in these small, unnoticed moments. Each bite shared, each flavor savored, each reflection considered, became a lesson in patience, gratitude, and presence. The night would soon claim all, yet the memory of sustenance and community remained. As twilight deepened, the last traces of sunlight vanished behind hills and towers. The village exhaled softly into the encroaching darkness. Stone walls of the abbey glowed faintly with reflected candlelight, while the thatched roofs of cottages glimmered with the warm orange of hearths. The wind carried a gentle chill, rustling through leaves and brushing against window shutters and doors. With the evening feast complete, villagers moved quietly through the lingering light, attending to personal rituals and preparations for rest. Some drew water for washing, the cool liquid running over tired hands, cleansing the traces of labor. The scent of smoke, roasted roots, and herbs mingled faintly with tallow and herb soap. Others arranged simple mats and straw beds, the rough texture grounding the body, reminding it of the earth and the day's effort. Novice monks moved in hushed unison through stone corridors, their robes whispering across floors polished by years of careful steps. Each carried a small taper in hand, its flame steady, illuminating faces, pages of books, and carefully stacked tools. The ritual of light was quiet yet profound, the flame representing vigilance, devotion, and the human desire to preserve warmth and clarity even as darkness claimed the world. Lords in their chambers retired with gentle ceremony, candlelight flickering across tapestries depicting hunts, feasts, and saints. Servants, attentive to every detail, ensured fires were replenished, water set by bedside, clothing laid out for comfort and practicality. The ritual of preparation extended beyond mere convenience. It was meditation, reflection on the day, a pause between labor and rest. Villagers engaged in small acts with intention, tucking blankets, checking children, whispering prayers of thanks for food, warmth, and protection. The scents of the day lingered subtly in the air. Smoke from hearths, roasted root vegetables, drying herbs, traces of bread and cheese, each carrying memory, warmth, and quiet reassurance. In private cells, novices whispered prayers to saints and spirits, trusting the rhythm of devotion and reflection. Taper light flickered in their eyes and on stone walls, creating a gentle interplay of shadow and illumination that invited contemplation. Quiet questions arose. How does ritual prepare the mind and body for sleep? How does awareness of light, warmth, and scent calm the spirit? How does prayer, whispered alone or with others, bridge day and night? In cottages, simple gestures carried equal weight. A mother smoothing her child's hair, a father arranging a mat for rest, a whispered thank you for bread and milk. Each act was reflection, care, and connection. The abbey's bell tolled softly, signaling the final office for novices. Its rhythmic sound echoed through stone corridors, across courtyards, and into fields beyond the walls. Monks gathered briefly for prayer, their chants a gentle lullaby for themselves and the village alike. Novices absorbed the cadence, mingling with incense, wax, and the chill of stone beneath bare feet. Harmony of action, reflection, and intention created deep calm, even as night fully claimed the sky. Stars emerged slowly, faint pinpricks at first, then more boldly as darkness deepened. The pale moon rose, casting silver light across rooftops, fields, and rivers. Its glow reflected in windows and hearths, mingling with candlelight to create a delicate tapestry of illumination. Villagers paused briefly at doorways or windows, eyes tracing the silver reflection on dew-soaked earth, flowing rivers, and stone walls. Light and shadow balanced delicately, inviting contemplation of cycles, continuity, and time. Taper flames flickered with draughts, hypnotic in their rhythm, inviting attention to motion and impermanence. Novices meditated on the day, the work, the meals, the teachings, the connection between effort and reward, mind and body, hunger and satisfaction. In manor houses, lords and ladies engaged in private reflection or quiet conversation. Last tastes of ale, spiced bread, and sweetened wine lingered on tongues, reminders of indulgence tempered by moderation. Servants, quietly aware of every movement, shadow and flicker of flame, ensured comfort, warmth, and order. Children, lulled by soft voices or candlelight, closed their eyes slowly, murmuring fragments of the day. Dreams formed images of markets, fields, kitchens, and familiar faces, mingling memory and imagination to bridge waking and dreaming. The wind carried faint scents of wet earth, herbs, and river water through open shutters and doors, a reminder of life beyond walls and hearths. Evening was a time of pause, reflection, and gentle awareness. Preparing for sleep carried lessons in patience, care, observation, and gratitude. Hands that had labored through the day now rested, warmed by taper light, hearths, and presence. Eyes that had witnessed labor, feasts, craft, and ritual could close, letting softer thoughts fade into dreams. Abbey corridors echoed with retreating footsteps, whispers of prayer, the shifting of robes. Manor halls absorbed the quiet energy of preparation, reflection, and subtle conversation. Cottages, humble yet alive with warmth and scent, held similar moments. Each gesture, each small act, became a thread in the tapestry of human experience. Questions remained, soft and subtle. How does preparation for sleep teach mindfulness? How does interplay of light, scent, and warmth calm body and spirit? How does continuity of ritual create security and peace? As night deepened, every taper, candle, and hearth contributed to gentle illumination, guiding body, mind, and spirit toward rest and dreams. The Middle Ages were alive in these small, intimate moments. Each gesture, each scent, each flicker of flame a gentle anchor, preparing all for surrender to night, to sleep, and to the quiet wonder of dreams. The village lay hushed beneath a blanket of night. Stars scattered across the sky in delicate constellations, while the moon cast silver trails across rooftops, rivers, and fields. The wind whispered gently through trees and over stone walls, carrying the faint scent of herbs, dew, and distant fires. Cottages, abbey and manor glowed softly with taper light, embers or moonlight, each reflecting quietly on the lives within. The villagers rested, yet the mind seldom surrendered immediately. Hands that had labored, feet that had traversed fields, markets and corridors, eyes that had observed the interplay of light and shadow. These now relaxed, yet remained attentive to the subtler rhythms of night. In these quiet hours, reflection drifted in. Memories of labor, shared meals, fleeting moments, lingering scents. The gentle ripples of the day passed. The smell of yesterday's bread, the touch of straw beneath tired hands, the warmth of hearth or taper light, all became anchors for thought. What lessons linger from the day's work? How does toil translate into satisfaction, learning, or memory? In the abbey, novices knelt in hushed prayer, whispers echoing softly against stone walls, taper flames reflected in their eyes, mirrors of devotion and introspection. Their prayers were simple yet profound: gratitude for sustenance, reflection on labor, hope for clarity in dreams. Even as eyelids grew heavy, minds wandered inward, exploring the liminal space between wakefulness and sleep. Lords in their chambers sat in reflective silence, tracing patterns on desks or tapestries, holding small books, fingers following illuminated script. Thoughts wandered through plans, recollections, regrets, and small joys. The evening meal, flavors lingered on tongues, a subtle reminder that body and mind remain entwined through sensation, memory, and imagination. Even in cottages, children stirred slightly in dreams, faces relaxed, expressions fleeting. Parents watched briefly, noting the gentle rise and fall of breathing, the warmth of blankets, the security provided by proximity and care. What invisible threads connect dream and memory, imagination and lived experience? How do small gestures, scents, sounds, and tactile memories shape the landscapes of dreams across ages? The blacksmith, retired for the night, lay listening to the faint creak of timber and the wind passing through shutters. Hammer and anvil rested, yet his mind wandered through the day's work, observing imperfections, successes, subtle lessons. Apprentices, hidden in dormitories or corners, slept fitfully, dreams interweaving labor, imagination, and curiosity. The wind carried whispers across fields and through open windows. Nocturnal animals stirring, the low hum of distant rivers, rustling leaves, soft clatter of shutters, a symphony of subtle sensations, a lullaby of place and time. Abbey corridors remained almost alive with quiet rhythm, the faint shuffle of extinguished candles, the soft creak of doors, occasional sighs, all punctuating the night without disturbing its overall tranquility. Questions persisted softly. How does solitude reveal hidden thoughts? How do night prayers guide the spirit? How does memory merge with imagination to form dreams? Moonlight shifted slowly across floors, revealing textures of stone, wood, and woven mats. Taper flames dimmed, casting longer shadows, softening edges, inviting contemplation. Even the faintest sounds became meaningful. The stir of a cat among hearths, the whisper of clothing as someone moved toward a chamber, the soft footsteps of a monk carrying a last task. Each detail contributed to a sense of presence, continuity, and rhythm. Villagers' minds, though weary, wandered through memories of meals, tastes of roasted roots, bread and cheese, the warmth of ale and milk, connections made in kitchens, markets, and fields. Lords reflected on strategies, small pleasures, fleeting insights, conscious of time's ephemeral nature. Abbey novices meditated on continuity, the passing of day into night, the bridge between labor and rest, the gentle dance of taper light mirroring slow thought and dream. Night brought clarity for some, comfort for others, curiosity for all. The liminal space between wakefulness and sleep allowed minds to wander safely. Senses engaged, the scent of herbs, the warmth of blankets, cool stone beneath fingers, distant echo of water, all inviting reflection. Questions of daily life continued softly. What will tomorrow bring? How will labor, sustenance, and reflection evolve? How do small gestures accumulate into understanding and memory? lords' quiet contemplation, monks' whispered prayers, villagers' half-conscious musings, children's dream-filled rest, all bound by the same gentle rhythm of night and imagination. Even animals participated, cows' low rumbles, dogs' quiet shifts, cats' soft padding across floors contributed to the symphony of nocturnal life. Stars wheeled slowly across the sky, their faint silver light a witness to centuries of such nights. The moon's pale glow reflected in rivers, puddles, metal, windows, and eyes, tracing a path through history, a reminder that the rhythms of thought, reflection, and curiosity are timeless. Gradually, villagers, novices, lords, and servants succumbed to sleep. Thoughts, musings, and questions drifted into dreams, mingling memory, imagination, and subconscious reflection. Hands that had labored, minds that had observed, hearts that had cared, all finally rested. The Middle Ages were alive even in these hidden hours, in the quiet of taper light, under the silver gaze of moon and stars. Every gesture, every breath, every whispered prayer carried centuries of human attention, reflection, and longing. As sleep fully embraced the village and abbey, questions, memories, and musings transformed into gentle dreams, a bridge between the labor of day and the awakening of tomorrow. The first light of dawn crept slowly across the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber, rose, and soft lavender. The village exhaled into the new day, stirred by the faint crow of roosters and the gentle rustle of leaves. The air was crisp with dew, carrying the lingering coolness of night. Each breath held the scent of damp earth, herbs, and the faint warmth of bread baked the evening before. The river shimmered, reflecting the awakening sky and casting ripples of light across stone and mud banks. The villagers rose gradually, some stretching beneath woolen blankets, others already preparing for the labor the day demanded. The smell of charcoal and smoke from early fires mingled with the aroma of herbs, grain, and livestock. Cows lowed softly, anticipating feeding. Dogs padded along paths, their coats damp with dew. Fields awaited gentle hands. Gardens the careful tending of those who had mastered rhythm, patience, and observation over countless mornings. Women and men carried out familiar motions, yet each dawn brought subtle difference. The way light struck rooftops, the sound of wind through trees, the feel of dew on hands and feet, all invited fresh attention. What lessons could the mind extract from repetition? How does the cycle of day after day deepen understanding of self, of labor, of community? The abbey's novices moved quietly through stone corridors, robes brushing the floor, voices subdued yet harmonious as they whispered morning prayers. The small flames of taper lights reflected in their eyes, in polished surfaces. The rituals of dawn were both simple and profound: a cup of water, a bowl of porridge, a prayer, a sweep of stone floor. Each act a meditation, each breath a bridge between night and day. The blacksmith returned to his forge. The anvil, cool beneath the hammer, waited. He inhaled the faint scent of heated metal, ash, and oil before beginning the measured rhythm of work anew. Apprentices followed carefully, observing not only technique but the subtle flow of energy, the importance of pause, observation, and timing. The manor stirred as well. Servants prepared water, clothing, and simple breakfasts. Lords and ladies, still half awake, observed the quiet bustle, each gesture intentional, each movement precise. Questions of continuity and renewal lingered softly. How does one carry the lessons of yesterday into today? How do small rituals and attentiveness shape the unfolding of hours? How does labor become reflection, reflection become memory, memory become guidance? In cottages, children stretched, yawned, and blinked into the new light. Parents watched, noting familiar patterns of growth, fatigue, and joy. The rhythm of morning, the gentle unfolding of tasks, muted conversations, carried a continuity that was both comforting and grounding. The smell of fresh bread, herbs, and roasted grains greeted them each day, a reminder of the care embedded in sustenance. Farmers went to fields, plucking weeds, checking soil, tending crops. The texture of earth beneath fingers, the weight of tools in hands, the gentle resistance of soil, all connected them to centuries of labor and human understanding. Abbey gardens thrived under careful tending, novices learning to observe the way light shifted, dew collected, and plants responded. How does observing life teach patience and insight? How does care for living things reflect care for self, for community, for continuity? The marketplace began to hum faintly with early arrivals, carrying baskets of eggs, grain, cheese, and herbs. The clatter of wheels on cobblestones, the murmur of voices, the smell of fresh produce, the warmth of sunlight, all combined into a gentle symphony of motion and life. Villagers, lords, and servants alike participated in this subtle orchestration, each aware in small ways of the other, each contributing to the seamless flow of daily life. The abbey bell tolled softly, marking the hour. Novices paused briefly, aligning thought, breath, and posture with the passage of time. The rhythm of work, sustenance, prayer, and reflection intertwined in every breath, every movement, every glance. The blacksmith's hammer rang out softly in measured cadence. Apprentices' eyes followed, absorbing rhythm, precision, and subtle artistry. The smell of heated iron mingled with smoke from hearths and the faint scent of morning dew beyond the walls. Questions persisted quietly. How does repetition cultivate mastery? How does patience shape understanding? How does subtle observation reveal what loud action cannot? Sunlight grew warmer, colors of fields, rooftops, and river glimmering faintly, creating textures of depth, life, and presence. Even the simplest actions gained resonance. A hand arranging grain, a loaf placed on a table, a child stepping carefully on a stone path. Each gesture reflected care, attention, and continuity. Villagers paused for morning meals, sharing simple bread, cheese, and broth. The warmth of food, the connection of presence, the lingering fragrance of hearths, and the subtle taste of herbs and grains intertwined into a gentle meditation on sustenance and community. Abbey novices observed similarly, tasting bread, cheese, and pottage. Each bite a quiet acknowledgement of labor, devotion, and gratitude. Manor halls carried more elaborate flavors, subtly spiced meats, pastries, stewed vegetables. Yet, even here, the rhythm of work, preparation, and appreciation created gentle reflection. The wind shifted softly across the village, carrying scents of hearths, fields, and river water. Birds began their morning songs, soft, sweet, precise, delicate. A reminder that each day brings unique patterns, even within cycles. Questions hovered softly yet persistently. How does renewal in the morning prepare mind, body, and spirit? How does attention to small detail inform understanding and awareness? How does the cycle of labor, sustenance, reflection, and sleep continue to teach, even across centuries? As the sun climbed higher, villagers, monks, and lords carried subtle awareness into their day. The harmony of human presence, labor, sustenance, and reflection formed a quiet continuum, weaving together earth, air, fire, and water. Life and labor, thought and memory, effort and reflection, each reinforcing the other, softly, quietly, persistently. Even in small acts, the world of the Middle Ages thrived, in continuity, in observation, in rhythm, in reflection. Each dawn repeated lessons of patience, care, and attentiveness. Each day offered opportunities to notice subtlety, taste, effort, and connection. Each rising sun became a quiet reminder of the delicate balance between labor, sustenance, reflection, and renewal. Morning light spilled across workshops and courtyards, revealing the quiet world of artisans and craftsmen. Each stroke of brush, careful hammer, and delicate knot of thread was a meditation on skill and patience. The blacksmith's forge glowed steadily. The metal warmed under practiced hands. The rhythm of hammer on anvil was soft, hypnotic, a gentle percussion echoing across stone walls and wooden beams. Apprentices watched intently, absorbing not only technique but attention, anticipation, and the subtle conversation between tool and material. Nearby, the weaver's loom sang a slower, measured song. The shuttle glided between threads, producing patterns both simple and precise. The soft scratch of wooden feet against polished floors, the quiet clack of threads, became a melody of concentration. The potter shaped clay on his wheel, slowly and deliberately, feeling the texture, weight, and subtle resistance of the material against his palms. The scent of damp clay mingled with smoke from nearby fires, drying herbs, and dust from wooden shavings, creating a layered sensory landscape of focus, rhythm, and quiet beauty. In the abbey's scriptorium, novices bent over parchment, quills scratching ink into intricate letters and symbols. Eyes traced lines, curves, and flourishes. The faint scent of ink, vellum, and beeswax mingled with the cool air drifting through open windows. Each motion was deliberate, each pause a moment of reflection. What lessons lie hidden in mastery? How does repetition, observation, and care transform ordinary material into something lasting, something meaningful? The leatherworker cut, stitched, and molded supple hides into pouches, belts, and gloves. Each action gentle yet purposeful, the texture of leather, the scent of oils and tallow, the quiet tap of tools on benches, a subtle meditation on patience and care. In a small corner, the candlemaker poured wax with precision, each taper rising smoothly, capturing the flicker of light. The aroma of beeswax drifted through the space, blending with the smoke of nearby hearths to create warmth, familiarity, and focus. Even the gardeners practiced a hidden art, pruning, planting, and tending herbs and vegetables with observation, learning, and quiet reflection. The wind carried the faint scent of soil, growing plants, and morning dew across the village, blending with the aroma of food and hearths to create a layered landscape of experience and memory. Questions of craft and mastery lingered subtly. How does attention transform labor into art? How does repetition build knowledge? How does observation shape skill and awareness? Children, often observers or occasional assistants, learned not only technique, but patience and attentiveness. Their small hands mimicking gestures, their minds absorbing rhythm, care, and precision. Lords admired subtle artistry in tapestries, carvings, and written works, yet often overlooked the quiet effort, repeated labor, and meditative focus that brought them into being. Abbey novices copied texts and illustrations with reverence. Each curve of a letter, each spacing of lines, each careful coloring became a meditation on continuity, legacy, and mindfulness. A silent conversation across generations. The blacksmith's apprentice learned to listen to the material, anticipate resistance, and trust the rhythm of labor while observing minute variations. The weaver's assistant learned to feel tension, anticipate patterns, and respect subtle imperfections. The potter noticed small variations in clay moisture, pressure, and speed. Each cup, bowl, or jar became an expression of skill and presence. The candlemaker guided melted wax into steady flames that would illuminate rooms, prayers, and reflections long after he rested. The leatherworker adjusted thread tension, cut precisely, and stitched with care, producing functional objects that carried warmth, protection, and subtle beauty. The village itself became a living classroom. Each workshop, each cottage, each corner, filled with small acts of careful attention and reflection. Wind shifted gently through streets and courtyards, carrying faint scents and sounds. The rhythm of hammers, shuttles, brushes, and quills blended with distant animal calls, flowing water, and rustling leaves. A quiet symphony of labor and awareness. Morning stretched slowly. Each hour continued the subtle effort of attention. Each breath, movement, and glance became an unspoken lesson. Novices paused briefly to reflect on the integration of observation, care, and patience. The skill of craft bridged labor, reflection, and devotion. Lords, ladies, and villagers absorbed subtle lessons in observation, patience, and reverence, even when not engaged directly in craft. The quiet beauty of each action carried meaning, a tapestry not only of design but of effort, attention, and memory. Questions hovered softly. How does human effort connect past, present, and future? How do subtle gestures shape lasting impressions? How does mastery teach humility, patience, and awareness even in the simplest tasks? Apprentices, novices, and villagers alike carried these lessons through daily actions. The blacksmith paused to note a subtle variation in a tool. The weaver observed a new tension in thread. The potter adjusted speed and pressure. The candle maker noticed a slight imperfection. The leatherworker considered alignment, stitch tension, and durability. Each act of observation, adjustment, and repetition became a meditation, a bridge between intention and outcome, labor and learning. The sun climbed higher, illuminating faces, walls, and workshops. The faint glow of candlelight mingled with daylight, highlighting textures, colors, and subtle movements. Even the smallest details gained importance. A shadow shifting across a wall, a spindle of thread catching light, a potter's finger tracing a subtle groove in clay, each a meditation on continuity and presence. The day flowed gently through village, abbey, and manor. Each craftsperson contributed to the rhythm of life, each action echoing with learning, observation, and reflection. The world of the Middle Ages thrived in quiet attention, hidden arts, and subtle transmission of knowledge. Each gesture, sound, scent, and movement testified to the interplay of labor, mindfulness, and legacy. The day leaned toward its gentle close. Sunlight softened, casting long amber streaks across fields, rooftops, and riverbanks. The abbey's bell tolled faintly, a quiet reminder that hours pass regardless of human presence. Villagers moved with slower, deliberate steps, the work of labor winding down, yet still infused with care and attention. The blacksmith set aside tools for the evening. Metal, warm from hours of shaping, cooled beneath his fingers. He inhaled the faint scent of ash, iron, and smoke, a reminder of effort, rhythm, and continuity. Apprentices lingered briefly, observing residual warmth in the forge, subtle shifts of light across walls, the faint echo of hammering still resonating through corridors. The weaver's loom slowed its song. The shuttle rested between threads, patterns catching the soft glow of late sunlight. The texture of thread, the delicate interplay of color, and the rhythm of motion lingered in the apprentice's mind. The potter, hands still faintly damp with clay, reflected on small imperfections and successes, each cup, jar, and plate carrying subtle lessons. The faint scent of damp clay mixed with herbs drying nearby, a sensory reminder of continuity and craft. The abbey's novices moved quietly through stone corridors, the hush of evening blending with soft footsteps, whispers, and the distant chime of bells. Taper flames flickered, reflecting in eyes and polished surfaces alike. In the scriptorium, quills rested, ink still drying on parchment. Novices reflected on copied texts, illustrated manuscripts, and the quiet lessons of observation, patience, and reverence. Each stroke, each letter, each tiny illustration, a meditation on continuity. Villagers carried similar reflections in their hearts and minds. Some paused at doorways or windows to watch the changing light, shadows lengthening, birds returning to roost. Hearths, herbs, and earth mingled with faint scents of bread and roasted grains, a sensory reminder of sustenance, care, and continuity. Lords in their halls sat in quiet contemplation. Some shared soft conversation, others absorbed the glow of taper light and lingering scents of spiced foods. Tapestries softened in evening light. Carved furniture caught shadows, polished wood glimmering under the motion of passing hands. Questions of reflection hovered softly across spaces. How does memory shape understanding? How does quiet observation reveal what loud activity conceals? How does the days past inform the future of moments to come? Children in cottages listened to stories told by parents or older siblings, tales of harvest, craft, or journeys long past. Faces glowed in lamplight, eyes wide with curiosity. Narratives conveyed lessons of effort, patience, and subtle wisdom, alongside wonder and delight in small joys. Even animals seemed to absorb the slower rhythm of evening. The low rumble of cows, the soft padding of dogs, the occasional flutter of birds settling, created a subtle accompaniment to human reflection. The wind carried faint scents of wet earth and distant wood smoke, blending with aromas of herbs, bread, and cooked roots, a layered reminder of place, labor, and community. The abbey bell tolled again, signaling vespers. Novices gathered in stone halls. Whispers joined the chants. The rhythm of prayer, reflection, and observation wove through the space, a quiet lesson in continuity, devotion, and shared experience. Villagers paused briefly as well, some kneeling in small corners of their homes, whispering gratitude for food, labor, and connection. Others simply observing the gentle play of candlelight and shadow across walls. The questions of life, work, and memory persisted softly. How does reflection deepen understanding? How do stories preserve knowledge? How does shared experience connect past, present, and future? Artisans observed their work from the perspective of evening light. The blacksmith noted subtle imperfections or triumphs. The weaver admired delicate patterns. The potter traced curves of clay objects with fingers. The candlemaker studied the flicker of flames. The leatherworker reviewed stitches and alignment. Each reflection became an intimate conversation with craft, material, and self. Lords and ladies absorbed similar insights through stories, memories, and subtle observation of surroundings. They noted quiet diligence of servants, the beauty of crafted objects, and the calm rhythm of evening labor. In cottages, small rituals continued. A mother smoothing a child's hair, a father arranging blankets or tidying simple spaces. The quiet touch, attention to detail, and calm observation all communicated care, continuity, and subtle wisdom. Sunset deepened the sky to warm shades of red, orange, and violet, casting lengthening shadows across rooftops, fields, and river. The last birds sang faintly before settling into nests. The wind carried a gentle chill, a reminder that night approached. The abbey's corridors grew quieter. Taper flames cast elongated shadows across stone and wood, creating a soft, meditative play of light and dark. Novices absorbed the calm rhythm, their prayers mingling with reflection, memory, and observation. Villagers' minds wandered gently between day's labor and night's rest. Memories of meals, work, craft, and shared conversation formed a gentle bridge to dreams. Questions continued softly. What did we learn today that endures? What gestures, actions, and reflections matter most? How do small, intentional acts weave the tapestry of daily life? The wind shifted gently through streets and courtyards, carrying faint scents of herbs, smoke, and dew. A reminder of continuity across space, time, and action. Even the faintest sounds, subtle shifts of light, and textures of objects became meaningful, a source of quiet reflection and wonder. The evening meal offered a final pause, a gentle meditation on nourishment, connection, and the culmination of labor and observation. The abbey's novices shared bread, pottage, and herbs together, their quiet meals an extension of reflection and mindfulness. Lords, villagers, and servants absorbed similar rhythms in their spaces. The blacksmith, potter, weaver, and candlemaker concluded the day's work, mindful of lessons learned, gestures perfected, and insights absorbed. The village itself seemed to breathe in this quiet moment. Continuity of effort, observation, reflection, and care formed a gentle rhythm, carrying from dawn to dusk. Questions of memory, stories, and lessons lingered softly. How does the unfolding of daily life teach wisdom? How do reflection and observation preserve knowledge? How do small gestures resonate across time? As darkness approached, villagers, monks, and lords prepared for the final hours before sleep. Each action, glance and gesture became a meditation on presence, care, and continuity. The Middle Ages thrived not only in labor, but in the gentle rhythm of reflection, memory, and quiet lessons. Each day, a subtle repetition. Each evening, a gentle reminder of human ingenuity, care, and awareness. The last light of day lingered softly across the village, the abbey and manor. The horizon blushed with muted shades of rose and lavender. The air cooled gently, carrying faint scents of herbs, freshly baked bread, smoke from distant hearths, and the lingering aroma of clay, wood, and ink from the day's labor. Each breath seemed to carry centuries of quiet reflection. Villagers, monks, lords, and servants moved through familiar rituals, their steps slow, deliberate, and meditative. Children yawned and stretched beneath woolen blankets, eyelids heavy from the day's wonder and observation. Mothers and fathers smoothed hair, adjusted coverings, whispered gentle words, and watched over them. Each small gesture a meditation on care, presence, and continuity. The blacksmith extinguished the last ember of his forge, watching the metal cool. The faint glow reminded him of labor completed and lessons absorbed. Apprentices lingered a moment longer, tracing patterns in shadow, observing the reflection of candlelight on stone and metal, remembering each subtle rhythm. The weaver folded her shuttle carefully, tracing threads with fingertips, recalling the flow of pattern, color, and tension that had guided her hands. The potter placed the last cups and bowls on shelves, feeling smooth curves, remembering minute adjustments made throughout the day, each object a testament to patience, attention, and care. The candlemaker finished pouring wax, watching flames solidify, anticipating the gentle illumination they would bring to prayers, meditation, and night. In the abbey, novices knelt quietly in prayer, voices a soft chorus echoing through stone corridors. Taper flames reflected in eyes, polished surfaces, and tiny windows. The prayers were simple, yet profound. Gratitude for sustenance, reflection, and quiet discovery. Lords in their chambers reflected on the passing hours, observing not only the work completed, but the rhythm of human endeavor surrounding them. Each gesture, object, and quiet movement carried subtle lessons in patience, observation, and presence. Questions lingered softly in the air. What is truly lasting? What is hidden in simple gestures? How do daily acts of labor, reflection, and care shape memory, understanding, and legacy? Villagers in cottages reflected similarly. The smell of herbs, roasted roots, and cooling bread carried memories of the day. The warmth of blankets, the presence of family, the quiet touch of hands, and the careful arrangement of home all whispered continuity across hours, days, and generations. Animals, too, seemed to settle into the gentle rhythm of evening. Cows lowed softly, dogs curled by fires, cats moved silently through familiar spaces, each contributing subtle presence to the harmony of night. The river shimmered faintly in moonlight, reflecting clouds, stars, and the glow of distant windows. The sound of water moving over stones became a quiet lullaby, a gentle reminder of the world's continuity and soft rhythm. Trees shifted with wind, leaves brushing softly against each other, creating a soothing soundscape. The abbey bells tolled faintly in the distance, marking the passage of time without urgency. Questions of life, labor, and observation merged into reflection. What has been learned today that endures? How does observation shape understanding? How do quiet gestures echo across time? Villagers, monks, lords, and artisans carried subtle awareness into dreams. The continuity of labor, craft, reflection, and attention became a gentle bridge into sleep. Each thought, memory, and quiet question weaving seamlessly into the subconscious. The moon rose fully, casting silver light across rooftops, gardens, fields, and river. Its glow illuminated textures of stone, wood, fabric, and water, highlighting shapes, shadows, and movement in quiet beauty. Stars wheeled slowly across the sky, faint reminders of the infinite rhythm of night, time, and human endeavor. Even the faintest motions became meaningful. The rustle of a leaf, the soft footsteps of a cat, the distant sound of water, the shift of a curtain, all contributing to a living meditation on presence, continuity, and subtle wonder. Children slept fully now, faces peaceful, breaths steady. Parents lingered briefly, observing, reflecting, then allowed themselves to drift into the rhythm of night. The blacksmith, weaver, potter, and candlemaker finally set aside all tools, each sensing the culmination of effort, observation, and quiet learning. The abbey's novices knelt in final prayer, taper flames casting gentle glow. Monks' chants faded into whispers. Lords closed books, tapestries, and chambers, resting into observation of shadow and light. Each participant in this quiet tapestry carried the subtle lessons of day, reflection, craft, and continuity forward into the night. The wind moved gently through streets and fields, carrying scent and sound, weaving connection across space and time. A gentle reminder that life, learning, and presence endure beyond immediate perception. Questions that had lingered through day and night softened into acceptance. What is fleeting? What is lasting? How do small acts of care, observation, and reflection resonate across hours, days, and generations? Even as sleep embraced the village, abbey, and manor, subtle lessons remained embedded in objects, gestures, and minds. Each crafted object, each prayer, each meal, each reflection carried memory, care, and continuity into the future. The river continued its quiet passage. The moon traced its path across the sky. Stars remained as witnesses. The village slept, yet the world of the Middle Ages thrived in subtle rhythms, quiet labor, reflective observation, and gentle continuity. The legacy of effort, craft, mindfulness, and memory persisted softly in air, stone, wood, and water. Each day, a small meditation. Each night, a bridge into dreams. Each gesture, a whisper of timeless human endeavor. As the final embers faded and the last tapers extinguished, the night deepened. The world exhaled in quiet rhythm, a gentle lullaby for all who observed, labored, reflected, and dreamed. The story, now complete, left only soft images of memory, craft, reflection, and human presence. A gentle invitation to drift into sleep, carrying centuries of subtle wonder and quiet legacy.